Fifth grade, let's talk about fractions. We're going to be working with fractions for the next several weeks. So starting with adding and subtracting fractions. We're going to be looking in this video at adding and subtracting fractions when we have unlike denominators. We'll get to including things like mixed numbers down the road. But let's start with simple fractions. What is a fraction? A fraction names a part of a whole. So a fraction is broken up into two parts. We have our numerator, which is our top number, which is how many parts you have. I like to think of fractions like pizzas. So if you have a pizza pan in front of you, however many slices are left is your numerator. The bottom number is our denominator. That's how many parts the whole thing is divided into. So in our pizza that we were talking about, maybe that was an 8-slice pizza or a 6-slice pizza originally. That bottom number, the denominator, is how many pieces there were in the whole thing. There's that fraction bar in between our numerator and denominator, which we've talked about before, means the same as a division symbol. When we add fractions, we need to make sure we have a common denominator first. That means we need the denominators to be the same when we're adding or subtracting. This ensures that we know how much our final fraction is worth. If we make sure that we're adding like pieces together, we can make sure our total matches here. So in this example, 2/6 of a pizza plus 1/6 of a pizza gives us 3/6 of a pizza left over. But what happens when we don't have common denominators? When we do not have common denominators, we have to start with an extra step to make those denominators match. That's called finding the least common denominator. We begin by listing the multiples of each denominator. A multiple is like a skip counting number, or the numbers that you say when you multiply one number times 1, times 2, times 3, etc. So I have some multiples for 3 and 4 listed here below. Once you list the multiples for both numbers, you start to look for the ones they have in common. So in this example, we see they have 12 in common. They also have 24 in common, but we want to use the least common. That means the lowest possible one, which is 12 in this case. So we will then make equivalent fractions with those new denominators. Let's look at that step in action here. So when we take a look at this problem, we have Juan and Raj. They cut up a banana to put on cereal. Juan puts 1/4 of the banana on his bowl of cereal, and Raj puts 2/8 of the banana on his bowl of cereal. Let's figure out what fraction of the banana Juan and Raj put on their cereal all together. Well, if we know we want it all together, we know we're going to be adding, but these fractions do not have common denominators. We have 1/4 plus 2/8. So the very first step we need to do is find a common denominator here. We need to list the multiples of both 4 and 8. So if I skip count by fours, I think 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. You can start by just listing a couple and seeing what they have in common. Let me list the multiples of 8 now. 8, 16, 24, 32. Already, I'm starting to notice that we have some in common. So I see that both 16 and 8 are on both of these lists. So I'm going to choose the least common denominator, which would be 8. So I'm going to now rewrite my problem with equivalent fractions with denominators of 8. Well, 2/8 already has a denominator of 8. So yay, that one gets to stay just the way it is. But 1/4 we need to turn into an equivalent fraction that means the same with an 8 in the denominator. So in order to change a fraction, make it equivalent with a new denominator, I think, how did I turn my denominator of 4 into a denominator of 8? Well, 4 times 2 equals 8. So because I multiply times 2 in my denominator, I'm also going to multiply my numerator times 2 to keep things equal, equivalent. So 1 times 2 equals 2. Now I have 2/8 as my new fraction, which is the same amount as 1/4, but I've written it with a denominator of 8 so that I'm able to add these two fractions together and figure out how much of a banana was put on the cereal. So now that I have common denominators, I've worked so hard to make them common. I'm going to keep that denominator 8. I want it to stay the same all the way across. And I add my numerators together. I'll add 2 plus 2, which equals 4. So Raj and Juan had 4/8 of a banana. Now you might recognize that, oh, 4 is half of 8. So I could even write this again as an equivalent fraction and say they had 1/2 of a banana on their cereal. We're going to talk a lot more about fractions 5th grade. We're going to really dive into how to make equivalent fractions and how those equivalent fractions are helpful as we add and subtract fractions. But this is where we'll stop for now. Thanks, 5th grade.